Mr. Clerk, I'm joined by Mr. Bonin, who will be here in about 10 minutes, and Mr. Buscaino is here. So we're going to hold all items that Mr. Bonin may have interest in. And Ms. Schechter, where you've been notified by the office, which ones are those?
I believe that is number 3.
And what about the other one?
He's interested in number 3, but you can go ahead with number 5 and 6.
How about number 1?
We should probably do all the airport items together.
So we'll wait for Mr. Bonin. Okay. So how about start with number 4? Is that okay with you, Mr.?
Yes. Let's do it. You're the chair.
I know, but...
It's your call.
Well, I just wanted to make sure we got that all. Before we do, we want to rise and recognize the young man who is the father of this fine councilman. We welcome Mr. Buscaino.
All right.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Thank you. Give him a big hand there. Thank you. Okay, good. Here we go. Number 4.
Under item 4, the Board of Harbor Commissioners submits for council approval the 10th Amendment to the permit with USEN Terminals, which is a permit for the operation of a container terminal at the Port of Los Angeles. The amendment would change the time period from 24 months to 12 months for advance notification by USEN to advise the Harbor Department that USEN wishes to exercise its option to extend the term by an additional 10 years. The permit otherwise will expire in August 2016.
Thank you.
Alvin Newman, CAO's office. We concur with the CLA's assessment of it. This is simply just to reduce the renewal period from 24 to 12 years, as was stated, in order to complete the EIR and EIS. And as a result of that, they're asking for it to be amended to 12 months.
Right.
Want to add anything on that?
No, I think he's covered it all.
Thank you. And just for the record, introduce yourself.
Oh, my name is Sumita. I'm with the Harbor Department Real Estate Division.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for acknowledging my dad. I also want to acknowledge Eric Martel, who his first TCT meeting now, the Port Legislative Deputy. Welcome, Eric. Looking forward to working with you. As far as this item is concerned, can you, is it?
Sumita?
Samita.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you give us some background as far as what the development plans are for the specific terminal? Are automated cranes included in the development of this
Sure.
YTI?
No, there's no automated cranes included, but what this project will entail is deepening the berths at berths 214 through 220, and then we will also improve berths 220 so they could, bring in a 100-gauge crane. In addition to that, we will be improving portions of the on-deck rail. So what this will allow them to do is bring bigger ships in that would help them be more competitive in the
I understand dredging. Is dredging involved as well?
Correct, minus
Okay.
47.
Is Patrick here? Patrick's not here this morning? Patrick Port? Okay.
No, Patrick he's in New York these
Okay.
days. Yeah.
I remember when the discussions were taking place about this. I'm really real proud of the fact that the port solidified this lease agreement in exchange for the improvements of the dock and the wharf there. And specifically dealing with the improvements to the how will the improvements help increase the efficiencies at YTI and ultimately make the LA port more competitive?
What will happen is you're deepening the berth so they can bring in bigger ships, and then they're bringing in the 100-gauge crane that will expedite, the offloading of the goods from the vessels. That would increase, their efficiency and help them be more competitive in the global market.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to approve this item.
All right, so ordered. And let me just ask, on item 7, is anybody here for item 7? Yes. Yeah, you want to be real quick so I get you back to work? Take up item number 7, please.
Under item 7, we have motion Garcetti-Labange proposing that the council instruct the Department of Transportation to report on the feasibility of implementing a pedicab pilot program in Hollywood.
Good morning, Tom Drischler, Department of Transportation. I'm afraid I don't have a lot to tell you in the way of progress that's been made on pedicab regulation in the city. My particular section is down a third of its staff since 2008.
Let me just ask a question. What other communities in Southern California allow pedicabs? Does Santa Monica allow?
Santa Monica allows them. They're in San Diego. They're in San Francisco. They're in Seattle.
Go check out all those cities, come back and report in 60 days.
Well, the reason we don't have them is because, this particular motion asking for a pilot program in Hollywood really requires a consultant study. You have to do traffic engineering.
Yeah, but I believe in you.
Yeah,
We don't
keep
have
in
money for
mind-
consultants, so here's what I want you to do. Just look around, work with the councilman of the 13th District, the Chamber of Commerce, work with the TLC Chinese Theater, because it's between Orange. The big challenge is there's so much pedestrians, so much traffic, would it be safe? That's how
Yeah.
I see
Well,
it.
there have been fatalities in San Diego,
Right.
in Seattle, in New York, other places. When you mix pedicabs that offer no safety whatsoever to
Right.
passengers with moving vehicles, it's a very dangerous situation.
Very good.
You
So
have
you
to
can
have
tell that. I
very
can-
thorough engineering studies to determine what the right places are for them to operate. And then there's also these other issues of how many operators do you want to allow in? And who's going to police them? Where are you going to get the staff to go out there to monitor what they're doing out in the field? Because we certainly don't have that staff to do that right now.
Okay. Very good. We'll hold it for 60 days, do work with the councilman. There's a new councilman. I think this name is familiar, the former councilman, so we may want to check in with him to see what it is, and let us know in 60 days.
Can I amend the motion to add,
San Pedro?
yes, downtown San Pedro,
Yeah.
there's a lot of synergy involved going on right now with waterfront
Maybe we should-
redevelopment.
Yeah, that-
And perhaps I'd like to amend the motion to include downtown, the historic downtown San Pedro area.
And what's the, correctly pronounced, the name of the new mayor in New York?
Oh, De Blasio.
Yeah, he wants to give it to the horses. If the horses need a home, send them to L.A. Okay, enough said.
Take the horses.
Thank you. I can't believe they're doing that, you know.
We
So-
approve as amended.
Very good. So it's 60 days, we're going to hold it.
60 days.
Yeah, but let's work with everybody, see what it is. But traffic is a good concern, and safety is number one there. I worry about that the biggest, and try to get over Highland Avenue, because there's so much congestion. So,
Yes.
let's do number
Mr.
five.
Chair, I'd
Yes.
just like to mention, years ago, there were pedicabs in Westwood.
Right,
They
okay,
lasted, I don't know, maybe a couple of years at the most.
right. So, okay, so that's very good, very good. So we'll ask you to help with the DOT. You don't need a consultant, you got the CLA to work. Good job, I like that. All right, next item.
Do you want to go to item 5?
Five.
Motion Labange Wesson proposes that the council ask the Cultural Affairs Department to report to this committee on an immediate plan of action to establish a cultural tourism plan working with the Los Angeles Sister Cities International, and to include a line item allocation in the Cultural Affairs Department's next budget for the LA Sister Cities program.
Good morning, council members. Matthew Rudnick, Interim GM, Department of Cultural Affairs. Councilman Labange, when we discussed this earlier and when you introduced the motion, we actually worked a little bit with Sister Cities to put together a preliminary package to be sent in with our budget to look at establishing a formal relationship with Sister Cities moving forward and to potentially replicate the good work we're doing around Bordeaux in the years to come. So that's moving forward and should be considered as part of the mayor's budget.
Good. Did I see the legislative analyst, Mr. Catalian? Will you testify, please? Avak? Just add to it, because you have that history and the knowledge, which is so key.
Good morning, Avak Katayan, legislative analyst. I have nothing to add, but I'm here available to answer any questions.
Very good. Do you know about cultural tourism?
No,
Okay. Do you have any culture in your mind?
everybody has culture.
I know. You're very good, Avak. So what we want to do is try to elaborate on this. This is really an opportunity, whether it's in San Pedro, whether it's the Watts Towers, throughout the city, our Olympic Stadium, and the Expo line, and work with the MTA too, because they have a little money, and they're trying to push people on their system. And now what the most interesting thing is, because of the work of the Los Angeles Tourist Board and Convention Center and others, the MTA, you could come to Los Angeles and see many cultural sites, but and not rent a car. So from Thai Town to Little Armenia to Hollywood to Universal, all the way through to downtown LA Live, Expo Park.
Down to San Pedro.
And to San Pedro. Very good. How do you get to San Pedro from Exposition Park?
Drive.
Oh, well, no, we got to get some transit. There should be a connector, like a connector, a cultural connector. Okay, a cultural bus. So we'll work together on that.
Absolutely.
Let's, our budget comes in April, but we should probably continue this for 45 days, and let's work again, and we'd have you good information, Mr. Catalian. Thank you.
This item is also referred to Budget Committee, I believe.
Right, but we want to touch it up a little so we make sure we get it
Right.
through in some form or fashion.
Right.
You know. Thank you. All right, so 45 days, we'll come back.
Thank you, sir.
Do more work. Thank you very much. Okay, next item.
Under item 6, motion Labange Weezer proposes that the council request the LA Tourism and Convention Board to report on the latest information from the U.S. Office of Travel and Tourism Industries on the current economic impacts of international tourism on the nation and on Southern California and the city of LA.
Super.
Good morning, Councilman and Chair. I'm Patty McJennett with Los Angeles Tourism and Convention Board, and I have my colleague Wendy Keel with us as well. Per your request, we're here to provide information on international visitation into the United States and then also into Los Angeles. And to put the numbers into some kind of context, we've compared them to 2009, which was really the low point in the last decade for inbound international visitation. And I think you'll see that the news is very good news, and I'm going to let Wendy kind of brief you.
Thank you, Wendy.
Okay, yes, I'm Wendy Keel, and if you turn to the first page, we're showing the inbound international visitation to the United States in total, and you can see since 2009, which again was the low point of tourism in the last 10 years, we now have a 25.7% increase in visitation from to the United States. So not only has visitation recovered from the recession, and in fact it's exceeding now visitation in all prior years and breaking records to the United States.
Why 2009, I'm sorry?
That was the low point. That was the lowest point in the last decade.
Here in LA or across the country?
Across country, everywhere. It was the bottom of the recession because it was an international recession. It wasn't just here in the United States as well, and it did impact travel throughout the world. And then now if you turn to the next page, comparing the same time period to Los Angeles, just looking at the yellow bar here, our growth rate during the same time period has been 35.1%. So we outpaced the United States in terms of the growth and the recovery. And you see the countries that are driving that, there's many, but the top countries are China and Australia, which was true for the United States as well in terms of the growth, but really benefits us, given the location to these countries and just the popularity of Los Angeles as a destination among Chinese and Australians. So that bodes very well for us. So we, in fact, did outpace the growth. There are some key factors that drove that, including just the recovery of economic conditions in general. We have to give some credit to that. But we do have new flights that came into LAX, again, from China and Australia, which are key drivers of this growth, and that will continue. We're seeing more flight coming in due to the Tom Bradley expansion and so on, so we expect the increase to continue into the future. And then we have this expanded international marketing program, so without telling people about your destination, they're less likely to come to it. So we have the combination of Brand USA, which is now marketing the United States as a destination. We have Visit California on the state level, and then, of course, us at Los Angeles Tourism on the local level. So you combine all those marketing efforts, and again, you come up with a 35.1% growth rate. What's not on this page is the year-over-year estimate from 2012, and these are preliminary numbers. We haven't quite finalized them, but we are looking at a 2.6% increase in international visitation 2013 over 12. And we do expect that to continue. What's significant and why we focus so hard on the international visitor is the economic impact. And though I don't have the direct spending number at this point, we're still waiting data from the Department of Commerce. We do know the international traveler, particularly overseas, they stay longer and they spend more. And not only they spend more, they're more likely to go to our attractions and our museums, and they are more likely to shop. They bring the empty suitcases, they fill them up, and then they go home, which is a wonderful thing.
What is the average stay? You say they stay longer.
They stay longer. They'll stay about 5-6 nights, and we're on average, our traveler stays maybe 4, and they'll stay at least 2 or 3 nights longer. They are also more likely to stay in hotels. A lot of our domestic visitors will stay with friends and family, but the international traveler is more likely to stay in our hotels as well. So this is one of the reasons we do focus a lot on our international travelers, particularly our overseas. They're particularly good spenders as opposed to our North American border countries.
And largely here for leisure.
And there are 80% are here for leisure internationally. 20% do come for business, convention, and so on. But 80% are here to do some kind of leisure activity, enjoy Los Angeles as a destination.
We're joined by Councilman Bonnet. Thank you, Mike. We're just talking about international tourism. Question I wanted to ask, too, if you had this San Francisco, I'd like to see San Francisco, what their numbers are compared to us, because I do believe the one thing that the coast has, the West Coast, is you're a gateway to many things. And is it the Golden Triangle? Is that a term, or did I make it up?
No, it's still referred to in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas. But
Or if you have to write a expense report, Grand Canyon or something,
right.
You don't want to say Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Hoover Dam.
The
You're checking the water at Hoover Dam.
Certainly
So-
Las Vegas is moving, they're trying to increase the number of international arrivals, but still
Well, here's what we need. I see
San
Mark
Francisco
Adams
and
was
out.
here earlier. I don't know if he's still here.
He's
But
here.
for the airport department, Mark, just heads up on this. I want a little more numbers. Lisa, you're assigned to this, to scrub these numbers. I want to look on the international flights. I know our previous mayor was so excited every time there was a new nonstop. And I'm sure Mr. Garcetti is just as excited about that.
So is Mr. Bonin.
And Mr. Bonin and Mr. Rosendahl and all the way back. The key is it would help us get some numbers. So I want to hold this for 30 days. And Avak, you're so talented, I want you to work on this project too, to get numbers of the international flights, how many international flights, and how far back, and I know how far back can you punch a number and say how many international people came pre-2001? Because I know I've heard a drastic number, like, is it 47% down or overall in international travel to the United States since 2001? Because you have to get visas and there's more challenges for people to go to the United States. So we'll look at that. We'll send you a little memo and we'll hold this. And Mike, we'll hold this. If you would, you'd probably want to have some thought on this as well and come back with the numbers. Information is knowledge is power. And the biggest thing we have to do is get the information so we make the right decisions that give us the power to help all people. So if we could do that, Lisa, you got the idea down, and this is very great. And, thank you for your report. That was a very good report, Wendy. I appreciated it.
Welcome.
So, and
Can I-
Patty is always. Yeah.
I'd like to also,
Get the port business in.
absolutely, the cruise industry, let's not forget about the cruise industry. We're losing a lot of the business down to Mexico because passengers are afraid to go into to Mexico. We just lost Disney. They're supposed to be here for 5 years. They committed to 2, but up to 5 years. Committed to 2, and they left.
Right.
And I know Congresswoman Janice Hahn is looking at the Jones Act in D.C. In looking at cruise trips from the West Coast port cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle. I like to, and I know we've taken a dip on our cruise passenger.
Huge dip.
So if you guys can come back, I'd appreciate it with a report on that and how we can promote more cruise business in and out of our port.
But yeah, what we'll do is also get the input from Chris Chase and a couple of people down at the port. They should be part of that report too.
Very good.
And Mr. Bruce, if you want to sign somebody, we'll have a little working group from your staff just to get the numbers, because numbers are so important. I was just fascinating right now. I mean, I'd love to go take a ship, and I'd love to go, if you had a bucket list, I'd like to go through San Francisco Bay underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, that would be something if they market north, because I know all the ships, they reposition them, and they're not in Alaska now, so there's nothing in Vancouver, but then they all come in the summertime to Vancouver for the Alaskan cruises, so we could understand that better. But being the gateway and welcoming everybody, we want everybody to start in Los Angeles and enjoy Los Angeles and say good things about Los Angeles. So let's hold
We
this.
want to be the number one gateway.
Number one gateway, yeah. What's San Diego like? Anything? Are they, let's get their numbers in there too, because they're...
They have not traditionally been an international destination per se, but they're starting to be. They have more direct flights coming in from
Right.
the UK, because
Yeah.
the smaller planes now can land
Can
there.
make there, yeah.
So we see that. And to your point about San Francisco being competitive, we also have to consider Chicago's in on the game, New York is in on the game. Everybody's recognizing, particularly the Chinese,
Right.
what a huge opportunity this is, and they do not want to miss out. So
Right.
we have competition, people nipping at our heels to decrease our market share all the time.
Right.
So we have to keep aware of that. And also just one comment about the visas. It is still a problem, but the State Department, we must give them credit, they've done a lot to improve that condition in China, India, Brazil. So a lot still to
Right.
do, but they have improved the situation quite
Yeah.
a bit.
Good. Thank you so much.
Maybe a question for the chair, Mr. Chair. The relationship with our sister cities across the world, is that adding value, increasing tourism here? Do we have...
Well, I think you got to market a little more, and like our best is with Japan in that sense there. But traditionally, it's up to our local communities to really market that. Little Armenia and Yerevan has been very good at marketing, and to the individual leadership. It's not the big numbers. I dream one day that people say, I want to come to L.A. because I'm a sister city, and I dream one day that you could do something, and I would like to see us market it with the Academy Awards coming up. And Kevin James, if you're listening down in Public Works, I'd love to get 3 rows on the bench that we give them the permit to put in Hollywood Boulevard that you could market in your UK market and Chinese market. Sit on the red carpet at the Hollywood, in Hollywood at the Walk of Fame.
Well, and actually, thanks to your introduction, we are doing that
This year?
Yes, we'll be bringing in meeting planners primarily,
Good.
both from domestic and some from international.
All right, I'll give a half day. I'll take them up to as close as they can legally get to the sign too, if you want. So I got the key to the gate.
We got-
Oh, we're
Don't go
live.
there, don't go there.
Okay, good job. Good job. Okay, let's hold it, but let's get the numbers back, because we want to meet this budget year and come up with something. Good job. Good job, Woody. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Patty, all the time. Patty and Janet, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. We're holding that too. And let's get, we have a couple airport issues, and we held them, but some may go on. Let's go with item number 1.
Under item 1, the Board of Airport Commissioners submits for council approval a non-exclusive pipeline right-of-way license agreement with Chevron USA so that Chevron can continue to operate its fuel delivery pipeline at LAX for another 5 years. This is at a rental rate which would amount to a monthly rent of approximately $3,000 or an annual rent of approximately $38,000.
Very good. I'd like to hear CAO first.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bonham, Mr. Buscaino. Bill Kreitz with the CAO's office. We've reviewed this, and we recommend approval primarily for 3 reasons. One, that it will continue a dedicated Jet A fuel line for commercial airliners at LAX. Second, it will result in revenue to LAWA of approximately $190,000 over the 5-year term, and it will help retain competitive pricing from having multiple suppliers of jet fuel for the airline. So for those reasons, we recommend approval.
Very good. Mr. Adams.
Mark Adams, Los Angeles World Airports. This is one of 4 jet fuel lines we have providing this easement or this license agreement provides for the right-of-way for the jet fuel line, one of 4 jet fuel lines we have serving LAX. So it's good to keep the 4 lines there for redundancy purposes, for reliability, for price competitiveness. As the
Do they pay state or federal taxes on the per gallon of gas the same at the pump that we do, or is it a different?
It's not the same rate, but there are
taxes.
Yes.
And is any of the fuel farm that's on the airport property being relocated in this redevelopment of Los Angeles International Airport?
It's not planned at this time.
Not planned, same spot. Very good. Any questions, members?
No.
No. Recommend approval. So ordered. Next item.
Under item 2, the Board of Airport Commissioners submits a replacement lease with Air Center Aviation for continued operation and use of an aircraft storage and maintenance facility at Van Nuys Airport for a term of 5 years. This lease would cover approximately 4.5 acres of land, 10,000 square feet of hangar space, 7,000 square feet of office. Rent would amount to $13,000 per month or $156,000 or $157,000 for the first year.
Bill Kreitz with the CAO's office. We recommend this as well for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that there will be a retroactive payment of approximately $41,000 to LAWA, and it will bring the rental rates for both the land and the buildings up to the market rate for this type of property. It provides payments to LAWA, as the CLA mentioned, of about $41,000 retroactively. It will also provide LAWA with flexibility for future redevelopment along the lines of the Van Nuys Airport Master Plan. It also aligns the department's goals with those of the Van Nuys Airport Revised Real Estate Redevelopment Plan. So for those reasons, we recommend approval.
Mark Adams, Los Angeles World Airports. This is a long-term tenant at Van Nuys, and this is just a 5-year extension. Their rent brings their rent terms up to date with everybody else.
Good.
Ask for approval.
Move to approve. All right, next item.
Thank you.
Under item 3, motion Bonin-Blumenfeld proposes that LAWA be requested to report on the results of the recently completed LAX air quality and source apportionment study, particularly concerning the incidence of ultrafine particles, as well as results of other studies on the health impacts of LAX operations. Also, that LAWA be requested to report on the environmental mitigation efforts being undertaken to lessen the airport-related air emissions in surrounding neighborhoods.
Very well. I have 2 comment cards, and if I could have staff stand down. Robin Wilson and Rachel Resting. Is that correct, Rachel? Yes. Okay, Resting, please. Thank you.
Good morning, council members of the Trade, Commerce, and Tourism Committee and Chairman Labange. Thank you for considering Councilman Bonin's motion for a report from LAWA on ultrafine particles. My name is Rachel Kesting. I'm a resident of CD11 and have suffered since moving to this area in 1998 from increased breathing difficulties. I cannot exercise outside in my neighborhood and suffer from respiratory issues, including asthma, and increased risk for respiratory infections. Medications are costly. One generic medication alone, for me, is $165 a month. There are others. In any event, I urge you to support Councilman Bonin's motion for a report from the Los Angeles World Airports from the Air Quality and Source Apportionment Study released in September of 2013 on ultrafine particles and the effects on respiratory and general health in residents living near the airport, also airport workers, and I might add, travelers. And this report should also include the environmental mitigation efforts undertaken to lessen the impacts of operations, both jet and vehicles. Also, that the requested report is under the guidance or with participation of the Southern California Particle Center at UCLA, directed by Dr. John Foynes, who led the research team in a defining air quality study and report of LAX in 2005. And also with the guidance, participation, and review from the South Coast Air Quality Management District, specifically Dr. Philip Fine, who has extensive history with reports of this nature. This type of study would set a precedent for future standards for all airports and support the modernization of LAX. And we would continue to be a leader in airport relations with communities. Certainly international airports located in residential areas have a special relationship with surrounding neighbors. An airport such as Schiphol in Amsterdam, rated 3rd out of 100 by Skytrax World Airport Awards, has programs in place to address air noise and environmental issues with neighbors. I submit environmentally friendly statements from their website for your review. I urge you to support this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Now I'd like to call on Ms. Wilson.
Yes, sir. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
SEIU United Service Workers West appreciates the opportunity to comment on the results of LAX Air Quality Source Apportionment Study. Our members load cargoes, clean planes, they provide security services, ferry passengers who need wheelchair service, and they check passengers' bags curbside at the airport. What all these workers have in common is that, along with other airport workers, face greatest exposure to pollutions generated by LAX operations. And they are concerned about long-term impacts of exposure on their health. USWW is particularly concerned about the study's results showing high levels of ultrafine particulate matter generated at LAX. The fine particles emitted from combustions of jet fuel, as well as vehicle emissions, have been identified by the State Air Resource Board as toxic and contaminant linked to increased cancer risk. Particulate matter exposure has also been linked to heart condition, asthma, and other respiratory ailments. Toxic air pollutants such as benzene, which is found in gasoline and diesel particulate matter, are suspected to cause birth and reproductive problems. The Airport Authority agreed to conduct a historic air quality study as part of a community benefit agreement prior to the last round of airport expansions. Under the CBA, they committed to initiate a follow-on health study to measure the impact of LAX air emissions on the surrounding communities. USWA believes that the next round of studies is critically important and should include focused health impacts on airport emissions on LAX workers, particularly any health impacts caused by exposure to particulate matter. We also think it is important to note that these results are being released nearly a decade after LAWA had committed to conducting the study, and that they are long overdue. The air quality and source apportionment studies findings should have been made available for public review and comment as part of the recent EIR SPAS process, but were not published until a few weeks after Council voted on LAWA's airport expansion proposal. LAWA failure to include the study's findings as part of a review environment baseline is proof the EIR was a result of premature planning process and include insufficient environment analysis. The EIR should be revised, recirculated, and allowed for consideration of the full environmental record, including these findings.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Bonin, I'd like you to start out on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Buscaino, thank you for being here as well. Staff could come on up now. I want to give some context to why this motion has been submitted. As the members of the public who testified indicated, this study was required by a community benefits agreement from a few years ago, and I'm glad LAWA did it. But doing this study is not the end of the process. It is, from my perspective, the beginning of the process. This is not the maximum of our efforts. This is the very bare minimum. And I think this needs to give us a pause, and it needs to give us cause to go forward in a different direction that we've been going in. We are very lucky that the economic engine that is Los Angeles International Airport is revving up. LAWA announced last week that 2013 saw 67 million annual passengers through LAX, which is record international numbers, and we're almost approaching our pre-9/11 numbers. 2014 will probably break those numbers. And while that's good for the economy, airport operations definitely take a toll on the quality of life for surrounding communities. And health impacts upon the people who travel through, the people who work at the airport, and the people who live near the airport is not, cannot be, and I will not let it be the cost of doing business. I aspire to have an airport that is the greenest and cleanest in the country, just as Mr. Buscaino aspires and is working very hard towards having a port that is the cleanest and the greenest in the country, and that's the kind of direction we need to be going in. So I got plenty of questions, but I'd love to hear from staff. If you could tell us about the study and tell us what the findings were.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonin, and good morning, Councilmember Labange and Buscaino.
Good morning.
My name is Michael Feldman. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for LA World Airports Facilities, and with me today.
I'm Robert Freeman, the Airport Environmental Manager for LA World Airports.
I'm going to do I'm going to cover some of the specifics that you just requested, Council Member, and then I'll turn it over to Rob to actually provide some of the detail about the findings. The air quality source apportionment study was, as stated, a commitment made by LAWA during the community benefits agreement negotiations, and it was completed last year. A very complex study. This study involved the placement of permanent as well as mobile air monitors around the airport in basically, if you will, concentric rings. So we could actually measure the emissions coming from the airport, and actually the scientists who conducted the study were then able to model how those emissions moved based on wind conditions, weather conditions, et cetera. So it was a very complicated study, actually cutting edge. There's no question that the airport is a source of emissions in the region. I would characterize it as a collection of mobile sources, if you will. And I understand that you're very familiar with the difference between stationary and mobile sources. Think of a mobile source as a smokestack, or excuse me, a stationary source as a smokestack, and mobile sources as moving vehicles, aircraft, surface vehicles, etc. There are also many other sources of emissions in the general vicinity of the airport, some fairly major sources, those being oil refineries, offshore, marine unloading platforms, the 405 freeway are just a few examples of major sources around the airport. The air quality source apportionment study was the first of its kind. This type of effort had never been done at an airport before, so it is very much a landmark study, and it did find that the environment around LAX is very complicated. We as Southern Californians think about the weather being good every day. But what this study did was find very interesting micro climate differences around the airport that have very much to do with how emissions are dispersed from the sources that comprise the airport. The study was conducted by an internationally recognized team of scientists. I sat through some of their meetings, and believe me, listening to eight PhDs discuss this topic can be very educational, but it's also very hard to follow. It was highly technical in nature. They were able to meet the objective of the study by being able to characterize what emissions from the airport, as opposed to those other sources, where did they go? Where did they end up in the neighborhood? There was a supplemental study performed to further investigate ultrafine particles, which is really one of the primary sources of interest. And Rob will cover that in more detail. And it did produce very valuable new information that will support future research by the scientific community, and we have made all of that information available. It's actually, the entire study is on our website and available to whoever wants to use it. Some of the key findings that were reported when we published the study were that all major pollutants were below both national ambient air quality standards and California ambient air quality standards. Hazardous air pollutants, also called air toxics, were comparable or lower than elsewhere in the Southern California air basin. Now that shouldn't come as too big a surprise given what the traditional wind patterns are. So there is transport from the airport to the east primarily because of those wind patterns. Air pollutant concentrations did show sharp decreases as distance from the source of emissions increased. And higher pollution levels were measured close to sources, i.e. busy roads and runways, but decreased rapidly downwind. I'm going to turn it over to Rob to talk a little bit more about ultrafine particles now.
Thank you, Mike. I have three main points to make about ultrafine particles. I want to put ultrafine particles in context for you to describe them, if you're not familiar with them already, describe some of the ultrafine particle measurements that were made during the air quality study, and then that one study that Mike mentioned about a special study, I want to mention that was about ultrafine particles, which I thought is a very interesting finding and a key finding, I think, for the study. And then lastly, there are two more points I wanted to make about contemporary health studies and other studies that are out there that talk about ultrafine particles. So ultrafine particles are a consequence of burning of any kind of fuel or burning in general. And if you can imagine your hair, and some people's hair are thinner than others, but generally a hair diameter is about 60 millionths of a meter in diameter. It's very, very small. But particles, you may be more familiar with particles of size 10 microns or millionths of a meter. That's associated with diesel combustion and other types of combustion. And a smaller particle than that is PM 2.5. You may have heard that as well, associated with the combustion of cars and trucks. That is 2.5 millionths of a meter in diameter. Ultrafine particles are 1/10 of 1 meter in diameter, or less than that. And so there's a term called nanometers. 100 nanometers is equal to 1/10 of 1 millionth of a meter. I hope that's as deep as I can share with you on the science part. But importantly, as a consequence of burning fuel, combustion, cars, trucks, power plants, cooking, smoking, airplanes, ships, trains, also create ultrafine particles, and they're also formed by chemical reactions of gaseous pollutants, nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides, and volatile organic chemicals in the air.
And those can settle in people's lungs, yes?
The consequence of the size is suspected that because it's so small, it can travel deep into the lungs, greater than particles of other sizes.
And there's studies have shown there's sort of an expectation, still not conclusive evidence, that they have the potential to carry toxic materials deep into the lungs. Isn't that correct?
Ultrafine particles are very small. They're nearly massless, and so their contribution to surface area to mass is consequential. So yes, small particles of toxic materials can have the ability to travel very deep when you're talking about sizes like this, like gases. Yeah.
And there are existing studies on ultrafine particles that suggest they may have significant health impacts, at least equal to larger particles, potential links to cardiovascular disease and other stuff like that.
So some of the studies that are out there say that. I'm going to comment on two, I think, of the most recent studies that speak to the health effects or the condition or the state of the research on the health effects.
Is Dr. Freund's study one of the ones you're going to mention?
No, it's not. Dr. Freund's study was an earlier study that was incorporated and included in the air quality.
If you could do your two and then also explain Dr. Freund's as well, that would be helpful.
I'll do my best. Okay. Specifically to ultrafine particle measurements that were conducted during the air quality source apportionment study, these are some points, some highlights that I want to mention to you. The ultrafine particle levels along the north and south boundaries of LAX, that would be on the Westchester side and on the El Segundo side, were uniformly low, and I have to put that into context too, because low is a relative term. I'll speak to that in a little bit. But as far as the measurements that were made in the field during the study, these were low. Okay, and I'll expand on that in a little bit. Okay. The ultrafine particle measurements in the field behind runway 25 right, and so on the south runway complex near Aviation Boulevard. That's where a lot of the airplanes take off. That runway system is called 25 right. The measurements in the field behind runway 25 right did not drop off when the runway was closed for several hours. This was a condition when they measured and there weren't any planes flying. What that indicates is that not all ultrafine particles come from aircraft engines. I mentioned before that ultrafine particles are a component of other combustion sources. So a substantial contribution to ultrafine particles are also due to motor vehicle engines. And I'll explain that part a little further too, because there's a little subtle detail about that. The average ultrafine particle number concentrations, understand that the only way that we can measure ultrafine particles really is by counting the number of particles. It's not like another measure that considers mass because they're so small. So the number concentrations were higher at the what we're calling the Community East site. This was a monitoring station that was downwind to the east of the runway, and they're higher than are typically measured in urban locations. And so we looked at other results that are done around Southern California, trying to understand what the relative concentrations are. So when you measure this site that was east of the airfield and east of the the 405 freeway, typically measurements at that location are higher for ultrafine particles than you would normally find. That's very expected because you're predominantly downwind of the airport and also downwind of the 405 freeway at that point.
USC did a big study about the distance between housing and freeways.
Yes.
So you may want to check that. Anyway.
Yes, thank you. The study you're referring to may be, I may be mentioning that one. So, okay, so the study found, our study found, that ultrafine particles decreased rapidly from the distance of the source. Now, this would be from the beginning of the runway when aircraft take off downwind. They decrease typically 70%, 1,000 feet downwind, 80%, 1,500 feet downwind, and this would be comparable to, by the time you get to La Cienega Boulevard from Aviation Boulevard, you've seen an 80% reduction in ultrafine particles from what would be measured near the blast fence. Okay? And it's important to note that there are currently no regulatory standards for ultrafine particles, which is the part of the piece that we'll talk about also a little bit. The regulatory condition of ultrafine particles, they're not regulated by anybody at this time. The special study, the interesting study that we did was based on data analysis from the first season of sampling. And the air quality study was essentially 2 seasons of intensive sampling, winter and summer. So the supplemental study was conducted to investigate UFP specifically. We did measurements at the Community East site, and this is the east of the airport, downwind on the other side of the 405.
This is Lennox.
I'm sorry?
Lennox.
Correct.
Lennox, yes.
Yes.
Arnold said.
Yeah, if you drew a beeline from the runway east over the other 405, we had a station right on the other side there. So we compared the results of that site to another site that was to the south, and it was downwind of the 405 freeway, but not downwind of LAX. So you had these 2 conditions where you had wind going over from LAX and then not. So what we found was larger ultrafine particles. And so the ultrafine particles that, there's different sizes. The larger sizes that are typically associated with vehicles. We found that at the site that is to the south, and the smaller particles, we found that there was an association with the jet exhaust. And so the site that was downwind of LAX, we found the smaller sizes of UFP particles. The site to the south of LAX that was not under the influence of the airport, we found the larger ultrafine particles. And I say that just to mention that there is a distinction between the sizes of ultrafine particles. Jet aircraft typically can be characterized by the smaller ones, and vehicles, cars and trucks have sort of the larger size.
Let me try to cut to the chase a little bit, because this is getting very technical, and we have to be in council in 25 minutes. When you started your presentation, you outlined some of the key findings, and I think that was some of the best stuff from the report. What's some of the most disturbing stuff from the report?
Disturbing. Well, I think the most interesting finding is that when you look at the ultrafine particles, jet aircraft can be characterized by a smaller fraction of those ultrafine particles. Vehicles, cars, trucks are associated with the larger particles. You find more of that influence on the stations to the east of LAX than you do at any other stations to the north and south. We found the influence of the wind was very significant on the dispersion of all pollutants.
Yeah, if I could, I think that to characterize it good or bad, that wasn't the assignment to this group of scientists. They were really supposed to measure and tell us what they found. The interpretation of that information is really subject of further research. That wasn't anything that we actually tasked them to do.
Okay, so what is the process to get that further research?
Well, I think
Because
that...
the point for the...
No, I think you're...
Well, let me just finish. I mean, the folks who negotiated the community benefits agreement, their goal wasn't just to have a study that is interesting. Their goal was to have a study and then figure out what to do with the findings. So what's the research? What's our next step?
Well, I think the next step, and Rob can help me out on this, but I believe that the air quality, the South Coast Air Quality Management District is conducting research now, or is proposing to conduct research now, that would take this information and use it to start really trying to figure out if there is a way to promulgate standards. And so that really is one of the very next things to do. What's very interesting about ultrafine particles is that they seem to be a byproduct of efficiency. And the more efficient engines have become, it seems as though the more ultrafine particles are being produced because there's a greater burn of the actual fuel. And when you look at what the aviation industry has done between, over the last 20 years or so, and actually between 1978 and 2012, the airlines and the aircraft manufacturers have improved fuel efficiency by about 120%. That's a reduction of 3.4 billion metric tons of CO2, for example, each year, or about taking 22 million cars off the road each year. So one of the things that has to happen is continue to push for more efficient, in fact, zero emission. And if you will, one of the things I could do is go into some of what we have done at the airport, and then some of the other things that are coming that will help reduce those emissions.
I'm going to ask about that in a second.
Very good.
I just want to... I want to put a human face on this because it's very easy to get lost in the technical details. When the airport commissioners came in here, I asked them, when they came in for confirmation, I asked them to please look out for Lennox. I don't represent Lennox. Lennox is an unincorporated part of LA County. It's extremely low income, and it does not have really a voice. And I said it before, I'll say it again. I am adopting Lennox. And I was extremely disturbed to read that the numbers for Lennox, as you seem to indicate, are 3 or 5 times higher than elsewhere. So either of you have young kids or grandkids, or would you have any concern about enrolling them in the Lennox Unified School District or in a daycare program in Lennox?
Well, I'm about to have a grandchild in a few months. And I would tell you that we've been working with the school district, for example, to both sound insulate as well as improve the air filtration in the schools. There have been millions, tens of millions of dollars spent in insulation and air conditioning in residential homes within the Lennox area. And I would say that aircraft are getting more and more fuel efficient, and they are producing fewer and fewer emissions. I would say that if we had done as well on surface transportation as we have on air transportation, then we would not have issues where we were worrying about being in attainment of the national air quality, the national ambient air quality standards. So there's more that can be done. I would say that it's a responsibility that everybody has.
Well, that's true. In addition, though, I mean, that wasn't really an answer to the question. But
well, would I have my kid go to school there? My kids did go to school in a heavily urbanized area. Yes, I've lived in a city most of my life.
Yeah, and that could be a place where the stats aren't 3 to 5 times higher. I want us to look at this. I know it's a tough question. I'm sorry to put you in that position. The human element of this, we have to have in the forefront of our minds. If I were a parent in Lennox right now, I'd be concerned about this study. I'd be more concerned than if I were a parent in another part of the city. And I know that there is not conclusive evidence about the health impacts of UFPs. And so we can easily say, well, okay, we don't have anything to worry about. There's no federal regulations. But it's a little, to me, like when Al Gore said there's no controlling legal authority. I mean, there's going to be findings eventually, and there's going to have to be stuff we're going to need to do about this. And I want us to start thinking now and ahead. So there's a few recommendations that I'm going to make. I'll just say them now. I have a couple more questions. But one is I would like, as part of the city's federal and state legislative program, to include support for any legislation and try to encourage legislation that would investigate the health impacts of UFPs and establish standards for safe levels. I would also, though, like LAWA to encourage LAWA to work with public health agencies in the area and try to do a health study of the long-term health conditions of LAWA employees and retired employees, just so we can see what's going on there. I'm very concerned about the folks who are on the airfield constantly. The third thing is I'd like LAWA to work with environmental regulators and monitors to look into what other airports and jurisdictions may be doing about UFP emissions around the country and around the world, to see what they're doing to protect residents from this kind of air pollution, and then report back to the council on what they find. And I'm doing that as an encouraging first step towards LAWA being in the lead. Let's find out what everybody else is doing, and let's be the best. Let's be ahead of the game. As part of that, at the same time, I'd like you to report back on all the things that LAWA is doing, but if you want to tell us a few of those now, that would be great.
I'd be happy to, and I would also tell you that we do believe that LAWA is on the forefront in our environmental, both our emission, our mitigation efforts, as well as our thinking about how we can do things better as we execute improvements at the airport. But over the past several years, I know that the council members are familiar with the LAWA's Flyaway bus program. That has reduced vehicle emissions by approximately 10 tons annually on roads approaching LAX. All master plan project contractors must use best available control technology on diesel construction equipment. That's the emission reductions to date total over 16 million pounds. That's the equivalent to eliminating 8,800,700 average one-way or 10-mile passenger vehicle trips to or from LAX. So that's one of those small programs. It's within the CBA and the settlement agreement. We have an independent third-party monitor who monitors all construction equipment being used at the airport to make sure it's absolutely the cleanest it can possibly be. We are continuing to work on converting to extremely low emission ground service equipment and other infrastructure to reduce aircraft-related emissions. I will tell you, nobody wants to burn less fuel than the airlines because of its cost. We've achieved electrification, or the ability to cold iron the aircraft similar to the ships, where they can plug into both shore power and preconditioned air. That means they don't have to run their onboard air auxiliary power unit, which burns jet fuel while the aircraft's on the ground. Our newer central utility plant will have double the capacity to heat and chill our facilities and a smaller footprint from the burning in the very efficient cogeneration gas turbines that produce power for that plant. We operate the largest alternative fuel fleet of any airport in the United States. We have a requirement for alternative fuel vehicle requirement for vehicles heavier than 8,500 pounds. For example, the LAX shuttle buses that revolve in the central terminal area, those are CNG-powered buses. And our award-winning rideshare program is one of the most successful
airport employee transportation programs in the country. That saves almost 8 million pounds of air pollutants per year. So that's just a very short list of some of the actions we are taking, and there are other actions that are coming.
That's great. I want to congratulate and celebrate LAWA for the stuff it has been doing. In Los Angeles, we don't often do a good enough job telling our own success stories, and that's an important one to tell. I think, as you just indicated, there's more we can do, and let's build on that. Part of it, as I conclude, Mr. Chair, is this underscores the importance for both LAWA and for me and for the mayor of moving forward on the ground transportation elements of the master plan, getting the people mover built, getting Metro to connect to the airport, doing the consolidated rental car center, doing everything else that makes it easier and faster for people to get to the airport so they're not idling and producing the emissions, and giving people opportunities other than automobiles and their emissions to get to the airport. So that's a key element.
And we appreciate your support there.
Mr. Buscaino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Bonin, for leading this effort, and to the LAWA as well, and just listening to the steps, drastic improvements that LAWA has made to improve and reduce emissions in the airport community. I come to you wearing two hats, as a council member and as a South Coast AQMD board member. And I'm anxious and willing to sit with you and Mr. Bonin and others to find ways to overall reduce emissions. Question on the regulatory standards on ultrafine particles. Now, you're saying there's no regulatory standards in place just yet?
That's correct.
That's correct.
And has there been talk with Dr. Wallerstein at AQMD to set some standards?
Absolutely.
Where are we at with that?
On the federal level, most air quality regulations come from the federal government, and there are parallel efforts in the state of California to examine ultrafine particles and move towards some sort of regulation, but we are a number of years away from the beginnings of that process. It is a lengthy process, and I think you can appreciate that it does take a lot of study and a lot of understanding about what the exact health effects are and what the exposure consequences are to those particles.
Use me as a resource, and I've been a sponge the last several months since the mayor appointed me to this board, and I'm looking forward to our ongoing dialogue on this issue. And it's, I have my dad here. He immigrated here from Italy for the fishing industry. He bought a home on Alma Street in San Pedro. We've seen the port of Los Angeles grow. We've had our fair share of cancer patients, of kids with asthma, and I don't want to wait for our numbers to rise in the Westchester area and in the Lenox community to take action. I hear loud and clear that the developments of the port and working on reducing emissions. I would say this: the airport needs to have incentive programs for their tenants to use green technology, very similar to what the Port of Los Angeles has done to their tenants. And that's something that is often, and it's clear that we've seen a reduction of emissions at the Port of Los Angeles by 90% of NOx and SOx. And the airport ought to follow in the Port of Los Angeles direction as well. We have preserved jobs down there. At the same time, we've lowered emissions, and I believe that the airport can do the same. And the story that I share is my brother-in-law, dock worker, 10 years ago came as after a shift at the docks, come home, would sit. Today, he's cleaner than ever. And that's a true testimony of the work that the airport has done in reducing emissions, and I know that the airport ought and can do the same. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you and everybody there as complex as this study is, but also looking at other issues out there, our freeway system, the 105 and the 405, as you mentioned, and the change. And I don't know how much percentage of cars are better, but I know as a child growing up in the city and playing in the city, you would get heavy lungs just anywhere you were. That's changed, but there's even more, and the more refinement of particles. Also, the Scattergood and Hyperion are all within, Big Edison are all within the wind that it's in the area there. Look at that, the oil refineries, which you mentioned, and the patterns. And what happens when it's foggy? Because does the fog bring stuff to the ground that you can't? I don't know. I mean,
That's
all I
part of
know.
the complexity, I think. That's
Yeah.
part of the changing weather patterns change
Right.
the emissions profile.
And I think Dr. Fielding from the county, you know, if you have and maybe Mike, if you wanted to reach out to him, he's very progressive, and just try to do something, set a standard. What is the value? What is the one value that we recognize? How the length of which someone lives, you know, I think is one of the things. And so how do you look at it? And the people who work there, whether they're working on the curb, and I've seen in other cities, I know now we wear gloves when we lift stuff, you know, but other cities now they wear masks if they're working there. It does look different, like there's a disease, but maybe that does help prevent the complexity there. So look at it all, and I think this has been very good, and thank you for the, I'm just trying to figure out all the particles, you know, from all that, but all of it is there. There's something in this room right now, very technical.
There's a lot of ultrafine particles here now, yeah.
What's your pleasure, Mr. Bonnet, on this? Do you want to come back to this committee, or what do you want to, or go to council and
Well, I'd like to move the recommendation for putting stuff in the federal legislative program to council. So we could move that to council and have the other recommendations I made be a direction to go forward with that, and then when they do that, come back to committee.
Got it. And I was the other thing too, I was thinking when you talked about what is Mr. Busca, I know has been championed, and previously Ms. Hahn and Mr. Villaraigosa, the plug-in at the airport and the plug-in at the harbor, I do, you know that's good. We are making advances, but we are in an urban area that is a challenge, you know, how we live in our area. So let's do that. So we'll send this to council, and then we'll go from there. We thank everybody, our public comment cards as well. Everybody, this completes our agenda at this time. There's no public comment?
Yes, and would you like to reconsider the items now that public comment?
Reconsider all of them, yeah. So we got them all unanimous on all things. Thank you, Michael. You're running the council. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.